Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, it sounds like Sherrone Moore, this Michigan program, are gearing up to go a little big game hunting in the transfer portal. I wouldn't say it was a quiet first 2 weeks for Michigan in the portal. I do think the first week, with all the quiet visits, I think Michigan spent a lot of time trying to get guys like Derek Moore and TJ Guy to come back in 2025. And it sounds like things are trending in the right direction for a lot of those guys. Like you're starting to hear the whispers about TJ Guy, Derek Moore, Rayshon Benny coming back to the program. It seems like the attention is now switched to let's go after some of the biggest names in the transfer portal at positions we think we can get better at. Want to get into some of those players, talk about some of those positions we're looking for Michigan to address. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Michigan fans, it's been a blast. We got a big day. We're all Tennessee Vol fans for the next 12 hours. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, let's start at the offensive tackle spot. And I'll start with this. It's hard, man. It's so hard to find starting caliber tackles in the transfer portal. You certainly have one with Falili Famoa. I think I said that name right. Tried a bunch of times before we went live. This is a guy that's getting day 2 grades in the NFL draft, and he decides to hit the transfer portal. Now, the question I have for you is, he's kind of a career right tackle guy. Fascinating story, right? Came into Washington State, thought he was going to play on the defensive line. Transitions to the offensive side of the football, emerges as one of the better offensive linemen that we see in the country. He plays right tackle. What I'm wondering is, how does Michigan, if Michigan is able to turn it up and get him, do you see Evan Link switching to left and keeping this kid on the right side? What do you think's the ideal situation for Michigan at the offensive tackle position heading into 2025?
I mean, honestly, it sounds like Sprague's kind of the X factor. If we're talking
Agreed.
what the position's going to look like,
Yeah.
Andrew Sprague is the guy. If he trots out there, I think you're really excited if you're a Michigan fan, especially if you add another tackle who I think you believe in to be a starter. Like, again, Faumu is a really interesting piece because you look, when you're going to lose a guy like Miles Hinton, and you didn't have super consistent tackle play from everyone else. Evan Link obviously turned it up and started to play really well.
Yeah.
And he obviously decided to make the move to the portal. So you're looking like you don't have a ton of proven there. So I'd like to see them add another tackle. But man, I probably want Andrew Sprague stepping out there as well.
It does sound like Andrew Sprague. It sounds like Michigan's got a lot of confidence in that 2024 class. Sprague, Frazier, Jake Quinera, a couple other names. I do think Andrew Sprague would be, but the thing is, I'm fascinated with Evan Link. When we heard Evan Link kind of emerging as that starting tackle on the right side out of fall camp, I was kind of surprised. I thought he'd be more of a year 3, year 4 kind of guy. You saw some of the growing pains early. It was not great early. I'll give this kid all the credit in the world because I thought it got a lot better towards the end of the year. Probably the reason Andrew Gentry decides to hit the transfer portal. You add this guy in, and my worries are completely gone about what the tackle play is going to look like, because you got a plug and play guy, and I don't know if he can't play on the left side. He hasn't really at Washington State. I have confidence with Evan Link or Andrew Sprague to kind of figure it out and get solid left tackle play.
Well, because honestly, you want 3 tackles probably any given year, because I think you see a lot of teams coming into, and then if you get an injury, that position, you can kind of work around a bad guard or a bad center, you can do a little bit to hide it. It's hard at the end of the day without fundamentally changing what you're doing to hide your tackle play. And I think Michigan's going to want 3. Again, I don't even want to ignore Blake Frazier's mix in this whole program. Obviously a very hot sought after kid out of high school too.
I'll throw in 2 more, Dill. Andrew Babelow, I think needs a year. What about Ty Haywood? That's about as ready-made. If there's a starting tackle in the high school ranks right now, it would be Ty Haywood. And so you could get him competing as well. You're building up some healthy competition and depth in that offense tackle room. I think the last thing I'll know, this kid road grades too. And so all our conversations about what the passing attack is going to look like with Bryce Underwood, one of the best things we'll consistently say is, hey, let's give Bryce Underwood a really good run game. This kid will help that out in a massive way. Now, another position that Michigan clearly wants to address is the inside of the defensive line. It's hard to replace Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Dill, if you were to try to do it, David Gooster from Washington State would probably make the most sense. You take a look at this kid at Washington State. He was a wrecking ball. And what I love most about him, he's a hammer against the run, but he's also a very good pass rusher. Registered 22 quarterback hurries for a guy on the inside, similar to Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. He didn't really come off the football field. Now, you talk about Mason Graham and Kenneth Graham playing 550-plus snaps this year. David Gooster played 579. Well, what does that tell me when I'm looking at this kid? They didn't want to take him off the football field. Not sure if Michigan's going to get a visit. This one would make sense for him. You know, you look at the development Michigan's had on the inside of the defensive line the last couple of years, and then you couple that with an opportunity to come in and get a ton of playing time similar to you were getting at Washington State. It's a little bit of a concern in terms of what the depth's going to look like on the inside. This addition would go a long way, him and Damon Payne, to saying like, hey, we're feeling pretty dang good about the depth on the inside of the defensive line too.
Because right now, as it stands, like you really need to see some big jumps from guys like I think Pierce is kind of on the way. I think so far he's played really good. But aside from that, like you need to see some monster jumps that, again, I don't know that where Michigan's at and probably wanting to have a better season next year, a bit of a bounce back, and probably be more of a 10-win team. You want to put too much like eggs in that basket. I wouldn't mind seeing them add, especially a more high caliber guy, because they like Payne's a good ad for sure, but he's much more of a depth piece. Like if he's starting for Michigan, that's probably not the ideal world. But David Goost is like a guy you look like him and Rayshon Benny potentially could be a really interesting starting pair.
Yeah, and then you start saying like, all right, Damon Payne and then Trey Pierce. And again, Eno Etta was a guy that, similar to how we talked about Evan Link, Eno Etta was never going to be a guy that comes in and dominates early. And especially when he's making the transition, we thought he was going to come in and play edge rusher. Now he's trying to put on weight and play on the inside. He's another guy that it could look very different. I always use the example of a David Ajabo. It's like he comes into the program. We don't hear of him for the first 18 months. Then you start hearing the whispers. And we knew we weren't because he was new to football. He was a track and field and soccer athlete coming out of high school. Then you start hearing the whispers. And then it's like overnight, the dude emerges being one of the best edge rushers in the country. I'm not saying Ed is going to emerge to be one of the best defensive linemen in the country, but he could be one of those guys where it clicks going into year 3 and you just get a different version of that kid in 2025. Let's talk about the off-ball linebacker position, Dill, which to me personally is not that much of a concern. I'll let you know once we get the word on Ernest Hausman. Jayshon Barham going down to edge, a move that I am a massive fan of. I just stand on, I'm just happy Jayshon Barham's back on the team next year because this kid's a freak. If Jayshon Barham moves down to edge, you're probably looking to bring in at least one off-ball linebacker. Troy Bowles would be my guy, and for a couple of different reasons. We're going to talk about 2 of them. Yeah, he hasn't played much for Georgia's first 2 years. I get that. Can you blame him? He's playing in a linebacker room that has multiple dudes who I think will be 15-year vets in the NFL. And so the fact that he hasn't played much, there's sometimes if you don't play much early, you might just not be as good as we thought you were coming out of high school. And then there's sometimes you just don't get the opportunity. That's kind of where I think I am with Troy Bowles. Freaky athlete. You know, he was a former defensive back, then kicked down to off-ball linebacker in high school. You can tell, and we're going to talk about another off-ball linebacker, very similar conversation. Michigan's trying to get more athletic at the off-ball backer spot. It's important when you add teams like USC and Oregon, and we all know what Ohio State does in terms of all the weapons they have on the outside. You need backers who can operate in space. Troy Bowles, to me, would make a ton of sense here.
And you look, I mean, if they're going to kick Barham down, you probably would want to add 1 or 2 more because I think they like what Cole Sullivan's going to be. I think Michigan, you watch the spring game, you're like, oh, that's like a fun modern-day linebacker. And even Jimmy Rolder and Jaden Hood have done good job in like spot duty. Again, those 2, I don't know that I see them as like starters.
I think I'll push back, man.
Jimmy Rolder's interesting. I agree because I thought a big step was made from 23 into 24. I thought he looked really good last year. Again, does he have that top-end athleticism that Ernest Hausman, like that down-to-down linebacker you kind of want to see from them? That's probably the question for Jimmy Rolder I still have, especially watching that Ohio State game in 23. And again, small sample size in a sense, but like that type of play, you can't give it up to the tight end up the seam and look that uncompetitive in that type of rep. That's my only question on Jimmy Rolder and him playing every down, if you will. But I do think there's some
That's crazy to hold that one play against Jimmy Rolder. Kate Stover beats him up the seam.
But like the problem is when they were taking out like Colson and Hausman.
Yeah.
They
And
Ohio
also,
scored on those
from
guys.
just a number standpoint too, because what if Ernest Hausman goes to the NFL draft? Then it's Cole Sullivan, Jimmy Rolder, potentially Jaden. So the numbers are a little bit small. And you definitely, if Ernest Hausman goes to the draft and Jay Sean kicks down to edge, you want probably 2 linebackers coming in the portal. Troy Bowles would be one. Very similar story, Dale. Kamari House, the under-recruited guy out of St. John Bosco in 2024, goes to Washington. Not the biggest linebacker in the world. Freaky athlete. Closes space at a very, very high level. This is a guy, 4 pass breakups and interception, played over 300 snaps for Washington as a true freshman at the off-ball linebacker spot. Just one of these guys would fire me up, but I, again, love most of all Michigan pivoting to these modern college football linebackers who are exceptional in playing in space. It felt like 5 years ago with Don Brown in town, we were too slow at the linebacker spot. We were just too big, unathletic. We had linebackers that would be damn good players in 2005, not in 2020. We're making that change, even with on the high school recruiting trail. Guys like Nato Osuboateng. I like where we're going.
Chase Taylor. I mean, Chase Taylor, obviously not the headliner of the class at the linebacker spot.
Yeah, very good point.
It's that long, rangy, athletic linebacker who you think can develop into a really nice piece. Hopefully, like Cole Sullivan, another guy who was very under-recruited in a sense, but you look at that spring game, like he can play college ball.
Okay, I want to get your take on the tight end position. Yeah, this has been a super quiet one. Max Clare started out his recruiting process in the transfer portal, Texas A&M, and then quietly makes his way up to Michigan. And from what you're reading, Michigan's got a damn good shot at adding a guy like Max Clare. Led Purdue in targets last year, was kind of the focal part in this Purdue offense. And as Michigan fans, we all know how much we want to run our offense through tight ends as well. Look, I'm comfortable. If we don't add Max Clare, I'm pretty damn comfortable. You're talking about guys like Marlon Klein and Hogan Hansen, Brady Prescorn coming back from the injury. But again, that conversation of building around Bryce Underwood, giving him a tight end that has shown he's an all Big Ten guy, that would go a long way in kind of helping Bryce Underwood get more comfortable at the quarterback spot in 2025.
And there's going to be that element of what they're going to do at the wideout spot because so far it's only McCulley, and I think a lot of Michigan fans looking like I would be very surprised if we were in a couple more. Now I look at Max Clare, where does he fit into the room? The one immediate concern that jumps out is I don't think you want to over recruit guys like Prescorn and obviously
Hogan Hansen, but
Hogan showed some good things. I thought one interesting thing with Hogan Hansen is I wonder if you can just play him as a little bit more of a wide receiver role.
That's kind of what they did
in that Ohio State game. And again, Max Clare, very traditional tight end. Marlon Klein, probably more of a traditional tight end as well. And then if Hogan Hansen can give you a little more flexibility and you can get some of the, or possibly 3 of those guys in the field, certainly at least 2 at once, then I think you don't run the risk of making Hogan Hansen feel like there's probably better opportunities for him.
I just don't. I mean, especially with a guy that's only going to be a sophomore, I'm not too worried about over recruiting. And it's also something that and I know you feel a little bit more stronger than me about it. Like, hey, you want to make sure you're giving your guys that you recruit at the high school ranks opportunities.
Well, Hogan Hansen's good. That's like the problem.
Yeah.
I don't think again, Max Clare's gotten more chances to play. I'm not sure Max Clare, he doesn't play over Colson Loveland. So there's a reason Hogan Hansen didn't play a ton of football last year because Colson Loveland's the best tight end in college football. I don't want to see Hogan Hansen not get his shot. I think he's kind of ready. It looks like he's ready. I felt like, again, when we got to see him on the field, he was doing a lot of really good things.
No, I mean, I see where you're coming from. I just think, especially with a freshman quarterback that we think is going to play for us, you want to make sure you're getting some proven commodities too and some experience. And Michigan runs a lot of 12 personnel and they rotate a lot of tight ends in. I don't think it's like one of those exclusively like we bring in Max Clare, Hogan Hansen, you're riding the bench the rest of the year. I don't think that's how it look. And again, I think Michigan uses a lot of tight ends. Well, as you mentioned wide receiver real quick, so I'm just going to throw this one out there. Like you saw Michigan. my biggest takeaway, Dill, I don't think Michigan will land Deuce Robinson, but they reached out to him. And what does that tell me? If I'm like trying to read through some tea leaves, I ain't no insider. Michigan's trying to go big game hunting in the wide receiver. You know, if they're going and contacting a guy like Deuce Robinson. Now, it sounds like he's going to go to Florida State. He's on campus there this weekend. What it's telling me is keep your eye out on Michigan being a player for an elite caliber wide receiver. Last guy I'll just throw out there before we end this one, Justice Haynes. He made his trip to Ole Miss, made his trip to South Carolina. No news is good news for the boys here. You know, so now he's coming up to Ann Arbor. I don't know. I don't know if he's on campus yet, but he's scheduled to be on campus this weekend. Prior to this one that's kind of how it works with Michigan too. Keep it quiet, keep it on the down low, and then let that Bryce Underwood commitment drop on a late Thursday night. I think that's what could happen with Justice Haynes. You know, there's not a ton of buzz around Michigan right now. I haven't seen him commit to Ole Miss or South Carolina. That's where he's been this week. We'll see how this one plays out. We'll continue to update it as it goes. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.